Am I the a-hole for refusing to let my husband's daughter move in with us after her mother kicked her out? Hi, Reddit. I feel conflicted and stuck in a really tough spot. So I need your judgment on whether I'm the ***hole in this situation. There's a lot of history, so please bear with me as I explain everything. I, 37F, have been married to my husband, Dan, 45M, for 5 years. Dan has a daughter, Lily, 17F, from his previous marriage to his ex-wife, Kara, 42F. Ever since I came into their lives, my relationship with Lily has been strained at best and hostile at worst. Dan and Kara split when Lily was 8 years old. The divorce wasn't pretty. There were accusations, custody battles, and a lot of bitterness. When I started dating Dan, Lily was still in the early stages of her teenage rebellion, and I guess she saw me as the other woman, even though Dan and Kara had been separated for years before I came into the picture. I always tried to make an effort to bond with her. I took her shopping, we had movie nights, and I tried to get to know her, but she was always cold and distant. She'd roll her eyes at me, make snide comments, or just ignore me altogether. Every time she stayed with us on weekends, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. I've often felt like a stranger in my own home when she's around. Dan keeps telling me to give her time and that she's just a teenager. But it's been 5 years of this. Every time I think we're making progress, she'll say something cutting like, "You're not my mom," or "I don't have to listen to you." I've tried to let it slide because I know she's dealing with a lot of emotions, but it's starting to wear on me. A couple of weeks ago, we had an unexpected knock on our door late at night. I opened it to find Lily standing there with her bags packed and tears streaming down her face. She said her mom, Kara, had kicked her out after a massive argument. Apparently, Lily has been skipping school, sneaking out late at night, and generally rebelling more than usual. Kara, who's always been a strict disciplinarian, had finally had enough. She kicked Lily out and told her to figure out her own way. Dan immediately embraced Lily, soothing her while she sobbed into his shoulder. My heart broke seeing her so upset, but I also felt a knot forming in my stomach. I knew what this meant. She would want to move in with us, and given our rocky relationship, I was worried about the impact it would have on our home. Dan turned to me after comforting Lily and said, "She'll stay with us, of course, right?" I hesitated. "I think we need to talk about this," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Lily, overhearing this, shot me a glare. "Of course you don't want me here," she snapped. "You never wanted me here." "That's not true, Lily," I said, trying to defuse the situation. "I just think we need to have a conversation before jumping into anything." Dan's face darkened. "What is there to talk about? She's my daughter. She needs a place to stay." "I get that, but we can't just..." I started, but Dan cut me off. "What's the problem then? Why are you making this harder than it needs to be?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Dan, we agreed that if Lily ever needed to stay here for an extended period, we'd set some ground rules and boundaries. I'm not saying she can't stay, but we need to talk to Kara first. This might just be a temporary fight, and we need to consider how this is going to affect things." Lily's eyes widened with anger. "You don't care what happens to me. You just want me gone like my mom does." Her words stung. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, she stormed upstairs, slamming the guest room door behind her. Dan turned to me, his jaw clenched. "I can't believe you right now. She's going through hell, and you want to talk about rules and boundaries?" "It's not about that, Dan. It's about the fact that Lily and I have never really gotten along. We need to figure out how to make this work without it turning into a toxic situation for all of us." He shook his head, frustrated. "You're making it about you. This isn't about you. It's about her needing us." I felt a pang of guilt. "I know that, but I also know that if we don't talk about this now, it's only going to get worse. Kara kicking her out is a big deal. We need to know more before we make any decisions." After that argument, Dan didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. I felt awful, but I also knew I couldn't just roll over and agree without thinking it through. Lily and I had clashed too many times for me to believe that her moving in wouldn't cause major issues. The next day, I tried to have a calm conversation with Dan. We should talk to Kara, I said, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. We need to understand why things escalated to the point where she kicked Lily out. There's probably more to the story. I don't care what Kara has to say, Dan replied bitterly. She's been too hard on Lily for years. This is just another example of her not being a good parent. I'm not defending her, I said carefully, but we can't make decisions without knowing the full story. What if this is just a temporary fight and they can work it out? And what if it's not? What if Lily has nowhere else to go? You want to send her back into a hostile environment? I sighed, feeling torn. It's not that I don't want her here, Dan. I just want us to be realistic. She and I don't have a good relationship, and I don't think ignoring that is going to help. We need to have some boundaries, or it's going to get messy. Dan slammed his fist on the table, making me jump. She's my daughter. She's part of this family, whether you like it or not. I won't let you push her away. I'm not pushing her away, I said, my voice rising. I'm just asking you to consider how this is going to affect all of us. Our relationship matters too. If she moves in and we don't address these issues, it's going to tear us apart. Dan stood up and glared at me. If you can't accept my daughter, then maybe we need to rethink this whole marriage. My heart dropped. Dan, that's not fair. I'm trying to be reasonable here. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, stunned. Lily stayed with her friend for the next few days, and Dan barely spoke to me. Every time I tried to bring up the conversation, he would shut me down, saying he didn't want to talk about it anymore. I reached out to Kara to try and get her side of the story. She was furious when she found out that Lily had shown up at our house. I kicked her out because she refuses to follow the rules, Kara told me over the phone. She's been skipping school, sneaking out, and lying to me for months. I'm at my breaking point, but this isn't permanent. She just needs to learn some responsibility. I thought Dan would back me up on this. I relayed this to Dan, but he dismissed it. Kara's always been too strict. Lily needs a break from her, not more rules. At this point, I felt completely trapped. Dan and I weren't on the same page, and Lily clearly resented me. I didn't know how to fix the situation without making things worse. Am I the a-hole for not letting Lily move in? I feel torn between being a good wife and setting boundaries for my own mental health. I love Dan, but I'm not sure how to navigate this situation without making it worse for everyone involved. Did I mess up by suggesting we take a step back and talk first? Should I have just let her move in, even though I have serious concerns about how it would affect our marriage and household? Part 2 update. Hey everyone, I'm back with another update. Thank you so much for all the advice, support, and tough love in the comments. Some of you were hard on me, and I've taken it to heart. This situation has gotten even more complicated, and it's forced me to look at my role in all of this more closely. There's been a lot of development, and I'll try my best to unpack everything. As I mentioned in the previous post, Lily moved in, and things started rocky but were slowly getting better. At least that's what I thought. On the surface, she seemed to be making an effort. She wasn't throwing insults at me every time we were in the same room anymore, and there were even moments when I thought we might finally be on the road to some sort of truce. But looking back, I think I was too eager to believe everything was improving. The truth was, Lily had just gotten better at hiding her resentment. It started with little things. I'd noticed that every time I tried to engage her in conversation, Lily would give me one-word answers or brush me off with a shrug. There was always tension in her voice, even if she wasn't being outright hostile. She'd only talk to Dan, and any attempt I made to build a connection felt like I was talking to a wall. One night after dinner, when Lily was helping me clean up, at Dan's insistence, I decided to ask her how she was adjusting. "So, how's it going? Do you feel a little more settled now?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Lily didn't even look at me as she wiped down the counter. "It's fine," she mumbled. I could feel the tension in the air, but I pressed on. "I know this hasn't been easy. I just want you to know that if you ever need to talk, I'm here." Lily finally stopped what she was doing and looked at me, her eyes hard. "I don't need anything from you," she said flatly. "I'm only here because I have no other choice." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, stunned for a moment, trying to figure out how to respond. I could feel my chest tighten, the frustration bubbling up. "I get that you're angry," I said, doing my best to stay calm. "But I'm trying, Lily. I really am." "Yeah, well, you're not my mom," she shot back, her voice cold. Couldn't help it. I let out a sigh and turned away, feeling defeated. This was the constant wall I kept running into. I was trying, but no matter what I did, Lily would always see me as the enemy. Later that night, I told Dan about what had happened. He listened quietly, his face tight with concern, but when I finished, he just shook his head. "She's been through a lot," Dan said, his voice tired. "You can't take it personally. She's still adjusting." "It's been months, Dan," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm doing everything I can to make her feel comfortable, but she still treats me like I'm the bad guy. How much longer do I have to wait?" Dan looked at me, and for the first time in a while, I saw real frustration in his eyes. "You're not the only one dealing with this, you know? She's my daughter. I can't just give up on her." "I'm not asking you to give up," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "But I need you to see where I'm coming from too. I feel like a stranger in my own home when she's here. I don't know how much more of this I can take." Dan let out a long sigh and ran his hands through his hair. "I don't know what you want me to do, honestly. I can't fix this overnight. She's not going anywhere." The conversation ended there, with neither of us feeling any better. That night, I laid in bed next to him, but I felt miles apart. The situation was driving a wedge between us, and I didn't know how to pull us back together. Then the call came. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m., and I was in bed reading when I heard Dan's phone buzz on the nightstand. He answered groggily at first, but within seconds, his whole demeanor shifted. "What do you mean she's not home?" Dan's voice was tense, and I immediately sat up, my heart pounding. "Kara, calm down. What happened?" I couldn't hear Kara's side of the conversation, but the panic in Dan's voice told me everything I needed to know. Lily was missing. My heart dropped. "Where was she last?" Dan asked, pacing around the room now. "Did she say anything to you before she left?" I jumped out of bed and grabbed my phone, dialing Lily's number as Dan continued his conversation with Kara. It went straight to voicemail. I texted her, hoping she'd respond, but nothing. When Dan hung up, he looked at me with wild eyes. "Kara hasn't seen Lily since this morning. She didn't come home from school." My stomach flipped. "Do you think she's with her friends? Maybe she just lost track of time." Dan was already pulling on his shoes. "I'm going to drive around, check some spots where she might be." "I'll come with you," I said, grabbing my jacket. We spent hours driving around town, calling her friends, checking the places we knew she liked to hang out. Nothing. No one had seen or heard from her. As the night wore on, my anxiety skyrocketed. I kept imagining the worst-case scenarios. What if something happened to her? What if she was hurt? Or worse? By 3 a.m., we were both exhausted and defeated. Dan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and I could tell he was holding back tears. The silence in the car was suffocating. "Maybe we should call the police," I said quietly, not wanting to alarm him but knowing it might be our only option. Dan just nodded, his face pale. Yeah, let's do that." We got home and called the police, reporting Lily as missing. Dan could barely get the words out. I had to do most of the talking because he was too shaken. They took the report and promised to start looking for her immediately. As we were waiting for any updates, Dan got a message from one of Lily's friends. His face went rigid as he read it. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "She's been seeing some older guy," Dan said, his voice tight with anger. "Some 22-year-old dropout." I froze. "What? Who is he?" "I don't know, but apparently, she's been sneaking around with him for months. That's why she's been so secretive." My mind was racing. "Do you think she's with him?" Dan clenched his jaw. "I don't know, but if she is..." He didn't finish the sentence, but I could see the rage boiling beneath the surface. Took another few hours, but the police finally tracked Lily down. She was with the older guy, just as her friend had said. They found them in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. She was safe, but the situation was far worse than we had imagined. The guy, let's call him Jake, had been taking advantage of Lily's vulnerability. He had convinced her that no one cared about her, that her parents were too controlling, and that he was the only one who understood her. He was grooming her, plain and simple. It made me sick to my stomach. When the police brought Lily home, she refused to speak to us. She blamed us for ruining her life, saying that Jake was the only person who really cared about her. Dan was devastated. I'd never seen him so broken. He tried to talk to her, but she wouldn't listen. She locked herself in her room and didn't come out for hours. We decided that therapy was the next step for all of us. We couldn't go on like this. Lily needed professional help, and Dan and I needed to figure out how to navigate our marriage through the storm. It's been a few weeks since all of this happened. Lily is in therapy, though she's resistant to it. Dan and I are also going to counseling, trying to repair the damage that's been done to our relationship. It's a slow process, but I'm hopeful we can come out of this stronger. Lily still blames me for a lot of what's happened, and I've accepted that it's going to take a long time to earn her trust, if I ever do. But I'm not giving up. I realize now that I can't force a bond with her, but I can be patient and let her come to me when she's ready. As for Dan and me, we're trying to find our way back to each other. The love is still there, but this has tested us in ways I never imagined. It's not easy, but we're committed to making it work.